This is a peek at the book. If we have time, I'll read a little excerpt, but it is on Amazon as well. And local bookstores. We've been working with local bookstores around Connecticut, which is really great, so that people can shop local for it. So when I was talking to the league and talking to Lori about our time together today, we thought, what are the ways in which we could really talk about organizing an advocacy campaign? Maybe it's something you really care about locally or at the state level. Locally, you're going to your mayors, your aldermen, your council people, your local boards and commissions, and then state, of course, you might be more familiar with because we focus so much on the state with the league, but your state representatives, your state senators, the advocates in those committees, maybe the legislative leaders, ultimately the department that has jurisdiction over it, and even the governor's office. So there's kind of there's levels to all this, but forming the relationships is really important. So we wanted to start with talking about kind of the communications, and then we can talk about the coalitions and then connections if we have time. So first on the communications, I think it's helpful to think about communications and break it down into two ways. One is the internal communications to those in the room and a part of the process, and then the external communications. So internal communications with advocacy would be the decision makers, right? That is the city councilors or the aldermen or the state representatives or the state senators. They are the people who will ultimately be deciding, or if they're not a decision maker, but they're a champion, they can help get you to the right person on the right committee. But there's someone in the room or at the table, whatever analogy you want to use. They are someone that is a part of the process, and that's that internal communication to talk to them. And so maybe you've all been a part of that in some way, whether you are calling somebody's office or sending an email, or you know that legislature because they're your legislator and you can grab their arm and try to get a word with them. Those are the communications that you can use to make sure that you're conveying your thoughts to people. And then the external is social media, general public, media, hoping that you can create some interest around this issue that then others will join you to say, what, that is a really interesting idea. How could I help? How could I help reach out to legislators, or again, helping with the internal communications, building that awareness, right? Abraham Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything, right? So if people care about an issue, you may be surprised to see that it actually can affect policy. There are many, many examples of whether it's real or perceived public outcry, public support, and then elected officials move in that direction because they see, wow, like this, we talk about firestorm, people care about this, we need to move for it, against it, whatever, good, bad, but when there is public outcry happening. So how do you create that? So it's the internal, which is the stakeholders and the decision makers, and then it's the external, which really has an effect. Everybody wants to get reelected. So it really has an effect on those that are serving in office. So I'm sure, raise your hand if you have been a part of internal communications. You have written a state legislature. You have called the state legislature. Maybe sent a text, right? You send a letter in the mail. You sign on to like a mass thing. Like almost everyone, if you care about advocacy, and that's why you're here, you probably have done something internally to say, I really care about this representative so-and-so. Please do something to help. And then who has been a part of any external communication? You written a letter to the editor, you did a social media post, you brought some friends to a party and said, let's organize, right? Almost everybody, which is also great too, because that's how you're bringing people in. So the communications is really important. So this is called Understanding the Workings of Government. And this is in the first part. So as you are getting involved, you use your voice through advocacy to test the very system you want to be a part of. For those who are witnessing the very issues they care about under attack, you must channel that anxious energy into action. Organize, do not agonize. To advocate legislatively, you can circulate petitions, write letters to the editor, make phone calls to reach elected officials. A series of calls on a policy matter can lead to a working group, and never underestimate the power of the team working together. I've seen groups turn public opinion on local zoning decisions and state administration policy. If you are in a city hall or a state capitol, then you might be able to grab a legislator's ear for a moment. Once you have their attention, connect the issue to their district and use facts while making your point. You can also advocate by testifying at a public hearing. For this, you'll need to contact the committee or office of jurisdiction and get on the docket to address the voting body at a set date time. For advocacy campaigns, perhaps a local referendum question, you'll learn ways to reach voters like in an electoral campaign, which we will review. You'll learn a lot about government by playing in this advocacy space, and understand what authority officials have and don't have. You'll also learn there are two ways to serve in a public position. Get appointed and get elected. And we go down the funnels of ways to get involved. But I just wanted to mention that. Has anyone else been a part of any advocacy efforts that maybe I didn't mention? Anything else that you advocated that wasn't the petition, the text, the phone call? Anything really interesting that you want to share? Anything innovative?
So I got my start 20 years ago, plus with the 36 campaign. Are you familiar with that one? Okay, well, it's a long time ago, but it was a citizen-led effort to reduce emissions from 30th power plants. And essentially what we did is we went from town to town and we gave presentations, and more people said, hey, this is a good thing, we should clean these up. And so we were successful.
Well, you said you went town by town. Did you go door knocking?
Some folks went door knocking. Others, it was basically calling a representative and saying, hey, we want to tell you about this 26 deal. Will you meet with us? They said yes. We would go with people, constituents, and then, you lay out the facts just like you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and quite often we were able to change minds.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah.
So my group, Citizens Climate Lobby, has been advocating for climate issues for almost 20 years now. And I don't know if it's innovative, but at the very beginning, a few of us, this was before my time, tried to get appointments in Congress. Nobody would talk to them because nobody knew who they were. They literally took themselves to DC, went into the office buildings, camped out in front of office doors, and when somebody came out, they buttonholed them and started talking. And I remember one talking about how she had to sit on her suitcase outside the door of some congressman's office waiting for a chance to talk to somebody. And it built over the years, and we now put 1,000 people in the halls of Congress every summer to lobby for climate causes. We're the biggest single advocacy operation in all of Congress by far. We get appointments, and now we get appointments. And last summer we got appointment about 90% of the offices in town and Senate to talk about our climate issues.
And I will make an assumption that they are constituents, and that's really powerful when you're dealing with elected officials. They want to talk to people who they represent. So if you are trying to get to a particular legislator, state legislature, or congressperson, find constituents find people that live in their districts. That is going to be really powerful to open the door when you have the meeting and you bring a couple people with you. Don't bring too many, don't overwhelm them, but bring a couple people with you. You could have one or two that are maybe not constituents. Maybe they're a leader of the group, or they have they're a staff person. That's fine. But on the whole, members of Congress and elected officials really do want to meet with their constituents. So when you're dealing with a legislative person, they really want to talk to people that live in their district. So really keep that in mind. Any other interesting ways you get?
My name is Alicia Jenkins for the Sierra Club. I learned how to organize by way of my church. I've been organizing since 2005, since I was 16. And I did door knocking, organizing people to get out the vote. And I noticed that's one of the things inside your book, which I hope that's it. Yeah. And we were able to get I'm from Chicago. We were able to get a lot of Chicagoans on the west side to vote for Obama in 2008 as a result of using the church, because that's like the bedrock for organizing, especially for Black Americans. And I do that type of work here in Hartford as an organizer. I've gone back to my roots and been able to do a lot of coalition, a lot of working together with other organizations, so that we don't work in silos. I think that's very key in organizing as well.
No, absolutely. And I love the church organizing because it reminds me, especially in the Black community and other communities, of meeting people where they are. Sometimes we need to be reminded of that. You don't want to be too preachy or talk at them. One social media post is not going to solve everything that you put out there that 3 people like. It is meeting people where they are. So where people are congregating, where people are meeting, where people are worshiping, with respect and with allowance, to see how can you go out to those communities for maybe groups that already exist, right? If you care about a local issue and there's a local beautification group, this gets you thinking about the different coalitions, which is a great segue into thinking about then, coalitions, because we don't do this work alone. So we really need to find partners. And sometimes those partners can be people you think you never would work with, like recently with PFAS, working with firefighters. How does the issues that we are working on, who is affected by it, and who can be helped by it, and then bring them in. And those coalitions are golden, because then you're building relationships, something may come back around that they need help with, and now you're really building coalitions. And that's also really powerful when you are advocating legislatively, because now you're not just representing this group of people that care about an environmental issue, but also the firefighters and first responders, and that has tentacles into a district, into a town. And so think about all the different issues that you care about locally and the state. Who else is at the table with that? With some environmental issues that get into healthcare issues. Now, can you be dealing with tentacles into the healthcare realm if you're dealing with, carcinogens or, healthcare issues? I mean, who else could be affected by this, and bring those related groups in and see if they want to have the conversation with you. And that's how you build coalitions to organize to get in front of an elected official internally. But then externally, what can you do together? Maybe there are ways to build up both groups, membership, organizational awareness, and whether it's letters to the editor or, some combo press releases or a potential event or a meeting to really blend people's interests. That's an allyship, right? You could work with the group who maybe you thought you'd never had anything in common with, but this particular issue focuses on both of us. I don't know if anybody is from the Bridgeport or Fairfield area, but is anybody here from UI? Okay. One of the issues bubbling up is these large lines that UI feels that they need to build to keep the grid going. But that is an example of it would totally decimate historic churches and historic houses. So I'm forgetting the name right now, but my niece at Tisdale. The historic houses and the Freeman Burr Center. Yeah, thank you. And then Southport, very different community in Fairfield, Southport and Bridgeport, where these lines go through and talk about community organizing, where people who maybe never collaborated in ways that they should have, but were literally within 3 miles of each other, really activated with church leaders and community members and Southport folks to really push back on that. So that is an example of coalitions probably had not worked together, absolutely allies in this fight. So far, so good. They have beat back on this proposal that is before the Siting Council, and they kind of went back and forth, but ultimately they've decided against it. But it's going to probably come back around in some form. And so for that community to be really mindful about the historic, literally it's a historic national area, over 100 years old, historic homes, the churches, and then the Southport area. So allyships, who else is a part of this fight or could be a part of the fight, and then bring them in. And that's just good for your organization, that you're just making friends and meeting people and growing your outreach. Anybody have a interesting kind of coalition story they wanted to share? Yeah.
Over the summer, I worked with a nonprofit focused on democracy reform in DC. And so our campaign ended up bringing together veterans groups, inter-religious faith groups, I believe, and just a lot of different actors, business people, to try to stop the stuff that's happening in the current administration. So I thought that was a very interesting coalition that never would have came together otherwise.
So I'm working on the environmental rights amendment, so putting environmental rights into the Constitution of the state. And there are a whole array of environmental groups, including, things like the pollinator pathway, so like people doing planting in their own yards. But also the League of Women Voters is a big part of the coalition. There's also a nurses association that's part of the coalition. We're working on more of like the medical health related kinds of folks, and trying to get the older people in Third Act and the younger people in the colleges together. So trying to build a broad coalition, because it's a big lift.
That is a big lift. So for a big lift, you need lots of people. That's great. Pursue all the avenues, right? So at least they know about it. People will have varying levels of engagement, right? But at least they can say, well, we heard about it. And then also people like to go with the winner. So once they see you're actually really doing well and wow, they're kind of all over town, then somebody who maybe you email that, you know, like a tepid response, maybe something, they'll be like, actually, yeah, we do want to meet with you, you know, because you're showing we're serious about this. Like, we're really going to stay on this issue. And then people who maybe you had reached out to will come back around. So a lot of this is about the external and how you can build up that support. I have a couple of examples, and then I want to say a word about the internal. So I'm not going to read all this, but in the book, and then you know some of this because you live it, different ways to advocate. So phone banking, which is not totally dead. I think when you're trying to reach voters, that's increasingly difficult because people don't answer their phones anymore. But phone banking in this sense, we talk about this, is, you know, you're calling offices, and that is effective. You say, I am your constituent, and here's my address. And so that phone, and humans do still answer the phones in state legislative offices and in congressional offices. So you really could, if you call their home office, not DC, but if you call the, you know, the district office, you really could get somebody. If anybody has called your member of Congress in Connecticut, you do get a human when you phone their line. So the phone banking, texting. Now, texting for political campaigns is, you know, they're uploading numbers and you're getting, and I'm sure we're all getting those, you know, texts for $3. This would be a little different. This would be like mobilizing texts. You know, if someone's not answering their phone, but you've got a list of people, you know, texting is a way to get in front of a person these days. So if it's one-on-one, that's one thing. If it's an organization, you might need to go through some approvals for that. But texting is a tool in our toolkit that we do need to be mindful of, because our emails are overflowing and the spam folder's overflowing and we're not checking the promotions folder. So texting is a way to get in front of people. Letters to the editor. I know they think that might be a little antiquated, but there still are some weekly papers. They all live online. So that still matters. If you're taking an above all approach, still consider the letters to the editor. It's a nice longer form way to put content out there. Little house parties, especially, I think that's most effective with a local issue. You know, if you really like the UI issue in Fairfield and Bridgeport, I mean, that was as local as it gets. So, I mean, literally saying my house is open, everyone please come over. We need to have truly a community organizing meeting, right? Gathering people in person is really special. It happens less and less these days and post-COVID. So to say, like, please come over, we are organizing how to beat back against this or that, you know, locally, that would be very effective, like locally in a ward or a district or in a town. Postcard programs, these have been all the rage lately. I would just say with the postcard program, make sure that it's targeted. Lots of people, you know, they're just like sending postcards and it makes people feel good, and feel good is good, but feel good is not always the best organizing. So when someone's like, we sent 5,000 postcards, like, well, did you send them to like somebody who you knew was already going to vote for you, you know, and that took you a couple of weeks? So just be mindful, who is the audience when you're doing a postcard program? Again, it would be very effective if it was a local issue and you're then mailing people locally in that area. That would make sense. But if you're just like blanketing people to say you did postcards, I would just be really mindful about your time and the expense with stamps and all the rest. Visibility and group visibility. You'll see this a lot with a political campaign. You know, they can't go door knocking at 7:30 in the morning, but you might see signs being held. Think about that sort of visibility too, because now you're creating layered ways that people are saying, wow, you know, I saw the letter to the editor in the paper, and I've been seeing some stuff on social media, and now they're on my corner where I get my coffee, and they're for or against this local issue that's happening. And it just shows, wow, there is a dedicated group that cares about this particular issue. So that's just that kind of visibility. And you might get people that then approach you, and then that's a way for you to, you know, maybe get their information, have them sign up, you know, always be building your coalition. Kind of the door knocking and the lit drops. Again, you know your issue best. That's not always scalable. If you're dealing with a statewide issue, that may not work. But again, if you're dealing with something that affects just a region or an area, door to door, by far, most effective campaign technique. Still, to this day, better than anything else, better than social media, because you can't beat a one-on-one conversation. I'm at your door. You're going to remember my face. Hopefully it's a pleasant conversation. And so if you have a local issue that you think this would then benefit from door knocking, that is still by far. And research continues to prove it. Yes, people don't always answer their doors. Yes, people have Ring doorbells, but they are totally watching you as you are walking up their driveway, maybe even from a corner of their house, right? They are, I know candidates who will leave a little infomercial at the 20-second on the Ring. Hi, I'm Representative so-and-so, and people will watch it back. And even though maybe they didn't get to talk to them, they still will say, wow, they came to my door, they did their pitch, they left information. So door-to-door human contact is still really effective for organizing. So did anybody else want to share any stories about coalitions or?
Yeah, I just wanted to share. I'm curious to learn about what it's like here. I've been involved in state and municipalities around the country, thinking about what the economies of scale are for shared resources to the voter file, catalyst, shared tradings around door knocking, and also creating efficiencies for costs. Because as we know, even though door knocking is the most effective, it's also the most expensive. And so when people are thinking about joint fundraising, a lot of these can be multi-issue coalitions because we're all coming at it from the same area, perspective sometimes in terms of community organizing. And challenges can be when you're knocking on the same doors for different issues. How do we work together? How do we have access to shared polling and data? How are we partnering with universities? So I'm just really curious to see, as we look at the legislative agenda coming up, both for the environment, what are the other intersecting issues you were mentioning, such as healthcare or the housing? What are those ways that we can build more permanent coalition structures that are not for just getting the legislative passed, building real community capacity for civic engagement?
No, that's a great point. What's your name?
Mary Tobin.
Talk to Mary after to figure out if you have figured that out. But I think that's a really interesting point. See, it's tough for political campaigns because we have really strict finance laws in Connecticut for coordination, but it's not the case with nonprofits.
And donors can talk to anyone.
That's right. So if you know you're maybe going to be in the same area but on different issues, why not team up and say, hey, is there a overarching message, and then is there a way to maybe get the data that you needed, but then that I needed? And that is literally a coordinated campaign in politics, and all the campaigns properly kind of pay in, and then you get one knock out the door for all the candidates of the same political party. It's certainly way more efficient. It bothers the voter less that you're not getting the door knock for this one and that one and this one and that one, or they can just roll through the whole ticket. So that's a way, if you had, again, those allyships, and then to build something, build some information sharing that would have value for the different organizations that are a part of it. Yeah.
Jimmy, thanks for your presentation. I just want to mention to everybody in this room, if you'd like to continue the conversation, bring some pizza here. Third act, the lobbying group for climate action. We're putting together a legislative campaign. There's about a quarter of us in this room who are in third act. We'd love to work with other folks. We just want to mention we're here and we're ready to fight for the right cause. One other thing I just want to mention is if you can't get that one-on-one meeting with your legislator, try to find out when they're having a little public meeting or a coffee, because that's your invitation to get in. Sometimes that's a lot.
Thank you for that. And we are just about at our time, so go ahead.
I just think a relationship with a legislative aide, while not as good, is, one thing
Oh, absolutely.
that's one.
No, the staff is critical. Be nice to the staff. They are the ones setting the schedule. So let me tell you a little secret. They are the ones putting together the schedule, and if they are going to give you time with their boss, we are at time. When I was talking to Lori, we thought it was just helpful to mention this. You may know this, but be mindful of the levels of government, right, and how you go about your advocacy. So we've talked a lot about your own state rep because that has value. If someone doesn't know a lot about advocacy, clearly this room does, help guide them so that they're not just going right to the governor's office for something that might be stuck in committee. You know where it is where your advocacy is best served. So you start with your local state representative or senator or mayor, councilman, whatever the local issue is that is tied to that elected official. Let's just use the state as an example because it's easier. If someone gets out of committee, then you could move your advocacy, to the committee chair. Then you can move it to the legislative leaders because it's all moving along in the legislative process. And so just be very mindful about where is this legislation along in the legislative process. It's probably not appropriate to call the governor's office when something is just bubbling up, but it may be appropriate to call the governor's office when it's done everything that needed to do, and now it's truly just kind of waiting for maybe like a little bit of a plug to get it on the legislative calendar before they gavel out of session. So be mindful about where legislation is sitting and explain that to your own members so that their advocacy really is being really effective to move things always along the next line in terms of state legislation. So I really appreciate it. This was a great conversation. It was great to see you all, and thanks for all the work that you do in your communities and around the state. Really, really appreciate it.
You take the experience that's in the Senate and you combine that, as you indicated, the power of that is extraordinary. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of political campaigns for years. And the key to it always was building coalitions. And it's amazing how powerful they are. And legislators do pay attention. They absolutely do.
2 seconds. How did we, the small guy, get hitched to your wagon after what A.G. Thomas, what compliment he gave to Roy about how important this group is?
Oh, well, that's our business. I mean, the League of Conservation Voters, organizes with you all about a legislative agenda. So we're at the Capitol. We have a professional staff at the Capitol. As important as a professional staff is, it's you who make the difference. We're only as good as the fact that you support what we're doing. So having an agenda, having people at the Capitol, and then organizing. It's amazing what you can do. And it's fun. Okay, this one. We gotta eat pizza.
All right, that's what pizza.
But church groups, I have to tell you, church groups, I found the most powerful group I ever for church group.
Yeah.
That's very good.